week on what I'd like to talk about.
Yeah.
One of them is the name Maitreya.
Yeah.
My understanding is that Krishna and Christ and Maitreya are all the same entity.
Right. Maitreya is one of the names given to the Christ.
And that there's something coming up in the year 2025, some great decision. Can we have any anticipation what might be happening? Is that
Well, in the 2025, the hierarchy meets in conclave and talks about goals and changes that they anticipate happening during the next century, and kind of formulate some new plans? Because just like a business, for instance, the hierarchy can only plan so far in the future, the various steps, and then they got to look at what's happened in the past and then incorporate that. And so in 2025, that they will have a conclave and plan out the changes of approach for the next century. And DK kind of hints at the idea that the new revelations may be given out after 2025. He said that he wasn't going to give out more teachings basically until around 2025, that the teachings he's given through LSA Bailey's plenty to keep us busy until then.
25 worth?
Yeah, we're getting pretty close. So when 2025 comes, a lot of people, I mean, not very many have assimilated what's been given out so far, but a handful will be ready for more material. But
2025, it's not anything the guy on the street would notice type of thing.
No, probably not. Outside of, there's probably going to be some interesting things happening in the world, but DK also warned us that 2025, approaching it, will be a dangerous time. He said that we will have threats to potential threats that could destroy humanity. And, with nuclear threat from North Korea and Russia and China, we do have that threat facing us.
Or Democrats in America.
Yeah. All the conflict between the left and the right, that's a big problem. But he did say this would be a dangerous time. And if we get through it, then if we get past 2025 in relative peace, we will have accomplished a great milestone.
Well, Trump will have just left office. So
yeah. So yeah, it'll be interesting. See what in the world the news media is going to talk about after Trump leaves office.
The Democrats might have to actually go back to work.
Yeah, all right. Okay, we're on rule 14. I'll read it one more time here. The sound swells out, the hour of danger to the soul courageous draweth near. The waters have not hurt the white creator, and naught could drown nor drench him. Danger from fire and flame menaces now, and dimly yet the rising smoke is seen. Let him again after the cycle of peace call upon the solar angel. And the first thing we talked about in this rule is the centers and prana. And we covered a little bit on the centers. I thought I'd go into a little bit more detail on the centers, putting together things, information he kind of scattered throughout his book on them. Okay, the 7 major centers in the body. Now there's a couple dozen minor centers, but these are the 7 major centers. Now some people say, well, there's 12 centers. We've have all kinds of people saying there's above the head center, there's 2 or 3 other centers up there, and I think most of these ideas come from channelings that are not 100% reliable. But we know the 7 major centers, and the center at the top of the head, and the head centers themselves are have a vibration far beyond just what the average seeker can comprehend, let alone some higher centers that's floating up there above there. So we have 7 basic centers, and these are the ones that's important for us to focus on and understand. The one at the base of the spine has 4 petals. He says these petals are in the shape of a cross, and they radiate with orange fire, and they mainly vibrate to ray 4. Now, some of the centers, as people move up in their evolution, will change rays a little bit. So these are the main rays that's in most of the centers of most people. But in a couple of the centers, like I believe the ajna and the throat, will sometimes change rays somewhat. Now, what's interesting about the colors with the centers is almost every New Age book you read where it talks about the centers, they say that the colors are associated in sequence. They begin with the base of the spine being red, and then the sacral being orange and yellow, and following the sequence of the rainbow. But according to DK, this is not correct, that the colors don't follow the standard rainbow sequence. So the base of the spine is not red, but it's an orange fire, he says. On the other hand, the sacral center, which governs the sex energies, which is just below the navel, it is red and orange, just depending on the person's focus. And it has 6 petals, and it's governed by ray 7. Ray 7 governs order and creation and physical materialization. So that's why ray 7 governs the sacral center. The third up is the solar plexus, and that's associated with the navel. And these are actually not in front of the body, but in back. And they're just a short distance from the skin on the base of the spine and behind us, rather than in front of us or in the body itself. So the actual centers, as they go up the base of the spine, are on just behind the back in the etheric body. And so the solar plexus has 10 petals, and its color is rosy, he says, with an admixture of green. And then the next center up is a heart center, and it has 12 petals, and it has a golden color, and it is associated with ray 2, and that ray doesn't change pretty much. It stays the same for everybody. Then the next one up is the throat center. It has 16 petals, and its color is a silvery blue. He says the blue dominates. So you have dominating blue with a little bit of silver mixed in with it. And then the next 2 up are the 2 head centers. And these are, the first one is the center between the eyebrows, called the ajna center. It has 96 petals, but 2 major petals composed of 48 petals on the right and 48 petals on the left. Half of the lotus is rose and yellow, and the other half is blue and purple, and it's normally associated with ray 5. Then we have the top of the head. As we said last week, it's called the 1,000-petaled lotus, but 1,000 is kind of the approximate number. He says there are actually 12 major petals of white and gold, And then there's 960 secondary petals that are arranged around the central 12. This makes a total of 1,068 petals in the 2 head centers, or 356 triplicates. He says all these figures have a very strong symbolic significance. So that's some interesting information on the centers there. Any questions on them before we move on? So we left off last week talking about prana, and the centers go hand in hand because the centers are distribution points of prana and spiritual energy. And so it's interesting to see how they're linked. He says, depending on how effective one is at assimilating these pranas will be the ability of the person to purify the blood with oxygen and maintain health. So to purify the blood, he talks about this as an important thing, that oxygen, purifying the blood, the centers, prana is very closely related to oxygen. Oxygen is closest, perhaps, element you could say linked to the spiritual energy of prana that creates life throughout the planet Earth. Now, the sources of prana, our number one source is from the earth itself. And the earth itself is a living entity, and we are part of the life of the earth. And as part of the life of the earth, we pick up this life force, this prana, from the earth, and it's picked up by the spleen. And this greatly affects our vitality in the earth, how closely our physical body is linked to the life force of the earth and picks that up. If we pick it up correctly without interference, then it'll greatly increase our power to have a healthy physical body. The second source of prana is from the astral world, or the emotional world. And this affects our desire nature. And our desire nature is very closely linked to health and vitality. If a person's desire is very weak, then he will often be anemic in health and vitality. If a person's desire is strong, then his vitality can be strong. His passion can be strong. Okay. Now, don't confuse this with the idea that it's bad to be controlled by your desires. Because something is strong doesn't mean it cannot be controlled and directed in a spiritual way. Okay. Okay, the third source of prana is from the universal mind, or the mental plane, and this is picked up by the throat center. So the throat center is able to pick up this life energy from the plane of the mind. And so this will stimulate creativity and logical thinking and your mental body. Okay, and the fourth is from your ego or your soul or your solar angel, and this is stimulated primarily done by the head and the heart centers. So through the head and the heart centers, you can pick up higher prana or higher life energy from the soul and the higher self. Now, everybody picks up prana from the earth, and if you pick up prana from the earth, you can stay alive. But the disciple wants to do more than just be alive. He wants to be alive in more ways than the average person. Okay, so prana is all associated with life force. So it's unfortunate for many people out there that the only life force they pick up is from the earth and also the astral body. Most of them pick up life force associated with their feelings and desire. But then the more evolved start picking up additional force from the plane of the mind. And this gives him a higher sense of being alive. And so the more refined the life force you pick up, the more alive you will be. So think of the person that can't pick up the desire energy or the life force from the astral world, doesn't have an idea what romance is, lives like the caveman. He's not, the caveman isn't as alive as the guy that develops emotional sensitivity and desire around the astral body. But he is not as alive as the person that picks up the mental energy from the plane of the mind. He gets ideas, he gets inspiration. And then from the soul itself, a higher form of energy comes still that makes the person even more alive. So you pick up these 4 pranas, you become alive in a way that that other people are not, and your past self was not. And then there's higher energy still from higher planes, but this is the main thing we're concerned with here, is these 4 types of prana. He said most people receive force only from the physical and astral planes, but disciples receive force from the mental and soul levels. Control of prana is the control of energy. The student must realize that the physical, emotional, and mental selves are energy bodies that the entity uses. The lower person focuses on energies from the 3rd aspect, or the Holy Ghost aspect, while the spiritual person puts attention on the 2nd aspect, which is love, wisdom, or the Christ aspect. And then the highest is the willpower purpose aspect, where the disciple picks up higher will through higher contact. So in connection with prana here, the student has 3 things to do. 1, he has to learn the nature of the energies of prana, which have brought his magical creation, the physical body, into manifestation, and which will keep it in such a condition that he can or cannot rapidly achieve the spiritual objective of his soul. So he points this out a number of times in his writing. It's that it's important to keep our to understand our physical body has tremendous symbolism in it. If you understand the body and all the symbolism in the body, the eye is really a great symbolic thing of the Trinity, for instance, that you can get much enlightenment. And it's important to understand how the body was created, and by understanding how the body was created, it was conceived by the soul, and then conceived in the physical, grown in the womb, and materialized. That the process of the creation of the physical body is the same as something you may want to create in your own life, or for the assistance of helping the world in some way. Okay, he says this lesson involves the disciple must arrive at a knowledge of which centers are open and active and the forces involved. And he must understand the relation of the forces to him to similar ones in the outside world and the earth. And then 3rd, he must work with various energies to bring about certain results. Okay, so each one of us must try to figure out which centers are open. Now, I've often had people say, after I've given a class where we have physical attendance, I've had a number of people come up to me afterwards and said that they felt a tingling in their throat or their 3rd eye, that something was being stimulated there. So this can happen if spiritual information is related that the person wasn't aware of before, it can stimulate the opening of a new petal in one of your centers. So sometimes the seeker will feel a little bit of tingling sensation there. And so that's interesting. So each person needs to kind of assess which centers are open. Okay. Now, almost everybody has their base of the spine stimulated to some degree, and the sacral center is open in a lot of people, or in just about everybody. And the solar plexus is open in everybody to varying degrees. So probably the first question, the main question the disciple needs to ask himself is my heart center open? And one of the ways to understand if your heart center is open, you won't necessarily feel big vibration going on in your heart or the centers that are opening, because people don't, unless you do it through meditation. But to approach it so the average person can understand, one of the ways to find out if your heart center is open is to understand there's a difference between spiritual love and romantic love. For the average person, love is just love, okay? If love is just love and doesn't have any division between it, then the person is pretty much in his solar plexus. If the person can understand the difference between romantic love and spiritual love, then the chances are his heart center is at least somewhat open. Okay, so what's the difference? Let's put that question out. What's the difference between emotion and love generated through the solar plexus, the lower self, and then the heart center, the higher emotional self? What's the difference between the two energies? How would you describe them?
Different color light.
Yeah, it's different colors, that's for sure.
Well, it's a different sensation. Like I can have a Christ love for Rick. I don't have a romantic love for Rick, but I can have a strong brotherly love of Rick, and I can appreciate what he does, or what Ed does, or what Blaine does, and I can open my heart and mind to send them power and support and creative energy and whatever.
That's
So
a good point. Brotherhood and friendship is the beginning of the opening of the heart centers, because true friendship, where you're a dedicated friend and understand friendship and brotherhood, demands that there is some opening of the heart centers, whereas desire for personal self is different. Now, everybody has friends, though, so some people, the friendship level and the romantic levels are different for people focused completely in the solar plexus. For them, it's what can my partner do for me, or what can my friends do for me, is the question in their minds. Okay, so as a person opens a heart center, it's more like, what can I do for my friends, and what can I do for my partner? And
Right.
that's
It
one of the
has
main
to-
dividing points. Yeah.
It has to do with selfless love and goodwill. You know, there's
Yeah.
goodwill and there's the will to good. These are different things, but selfless love is when you don't expect something for another. You love that person. You love to do well for that person, to help them.
Yeah, that's a good point. So in the solar plexus love, you give, but then you expect something back. In the heart-centered love, you give, and if you get something back, fine. If you don't, fine. You're willing to do it anyway.
So that's like love, family love of family.
Yeah, love of family helps to stimulate the heart. Now, on the other hand, there's a lot of parents that if they help their kids, they expect some as much out of it as they give in. But the heart-centered parent gives to the kid no matter what, without expecting anything, even if he gets nothing in return. He's still.
Well, we're creating a heart-centered family right here.
Yeah,
so,
that's true.
like if Ken wanted something that I could help him with, I'm available. I think that's another aspect of opening the heart center, is to be available, to share your time, talents, resources, all that you have. You can contribute in a higher way, with, like you say, without wanting anything back.
Yeah, a mistake a lot of teachers make concerning the heart energy is they don't differentiate between the lower and higher feelings. They just lump lower and higher all together and say, go with your heart. And when they say go with your heart, what they really mean is go with your feelings, whether it be low or high. Okay. But you don't want to always go with your lower feelings, because they will lead you the wrong direction almost every time. But your higher feelings, the spiritual feelings from your heart, they will lead you in the right direction. But your lower feelings are extremely deceptive and will lead you to many different dead ends. Okay, any more comments on that?
Yeah, JJ, I was thinking that when you are focused more on the solar plexus energy, you can't let go of the ego when you're involved with romantic love. But when you're focused more on the spiritual love, higher love, there's a letting go of the ego, and you're not restricted to focusing your energies on your love energy on one person. It's more global, more for humanity, and that's why you expect nothing back in return and still get that feeling of goodness and goodwill.
Yeah, and what's funny about that is when you expect nothing, that's when you get everything. When you expect and demand something in return, you're never happy. You never get what you demand. So it's just like raising a kid. If you're really demanding with your kid that he perform exactly the way you want him to, well, you'll be disappointed every time. But on the other hand, if you just give to them and let them develop, then they will wind up surprising you and performing in ways that you didn't even imagine sometimes. So same thing with your friends, with your partner in life. And
I can see what Jill's saying, though, where the ego, you're connected to maybe one person.
Yeah.
You can't let go of your ego or your personality level. It's where you're linked. But when you're open to a higher level, you can send out love. You can radiate it in a multitude of directions, and you won't get everything back. It's impossible, but that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you don't get it, like you say, if you don't get everything back, you just got to figure that's fine. Still accomplish some good in the world. But there's the law of karma says that what we do send out, we will get back in some way. Maybe not exactly in kind, but it will come back somehow. Yeah, Blaine.
That's basically what I was going to say. You get everything back, whether you like it or not. Good or bad.
Sometimes we don't like it, huh, Blaine?
Yeah. Well, it depends on what you're putting out. If you're putting out, good, positive stuff, you're going to get back good and positive things. And it's the same thing.
Yeah, if you put out hate, you'll get hate. If you put out love, you get love back. So, yeah, good point.
This is all tying into my third note that I'd taken this week was that one of the things that we would do for in the preparation for the coming of the Aquarian avatar is that the people, all the people on Earth, would begin to recognize themselves as an Earth family.
Yeah. And that's what we need to do. And I think the Tibetan expected us to be farther along at this point in time as far as being an Earth family, from the way he talked about this time period and what his hope was around it. I think we're a little bit behind schedule on that, but hopefully we can catch up. Okay, it says the disciple must understand the relation of the forces to him, of him to similar ones in the outside world and the earth. So there's forces at play all around the earth. For instance, the one that's really at play now is the fight between the political left and the political right. I mean, it's really fierce. So how do the forces in you relate to that? You know, that's an interesting concept. And the forces playing out in, say, medicine and education, politics, as we said, science, in religion and teaching and spiritual movements throughout the earth. There's forces at play, and they're all linked to you in some way, whether it be strong or very subtle.
It's
And
like having the flu. It has to reach a crisis before it can be resolved.
yeah, hopefully we can resolve it rather than it get the best of us. Okay, we need to work with these energies to bring about a link with the soul to control the lower self. The lower self can't control itself correctly. It can only be controlled when we link up with the soul and get some communication there to guide us correctly. Without this, we'll hit dead end after dead end and be frustrated time and time again. And once that link up is made, then the frustration level goes way down. And then the second thing we need to link up with is a new group of world servers to add to their force. So when we do our meditations, personal or in our group, we need to always have that realization that there are a lot of other seekers like ourselves out there. It'd be nice if we knew who they all were and could gather them all together in one spot. Now they are on a higher level on the higher realms, they are mentally gathered. And so we need to tune into that idea that seekers like ourselves are scattered throughout the entire planet, and they want to link up with us as we want to link up with them. And so be aware that there are thousands of people out there that are trying to do a similar thing to what we're doing. Okay, and next he says that the personality needs directed to positive ends, because without this spiritual communication, the personality really frustrates itself again and again.
Well, the personality is a good servant, but a very poor master.
That's very good. That could go down as a famous quote there, Curtis.
Yeah, you write that down, John.
That makes a good bumper sticker.
Yeah, right. Good bumper sticker, Curtis.
Yeah.
Okay, he says we need to learn to live as a soul and therefore free from identification with the body and nature. This brings about three things when this happens: an ability to withdraw into the head consciousness, and from that high place, direct the life of the personal self. Now, it's interesting that probably just about everybody on the planet thinks they're in their head, but they're not really in their head consciousness. They have their brain functioning and calculating things, but their consciousness, a lot of their consciousness is too much in the solar plexus, but their consciousness needs to be lifted up to that, he says, that high place in the head. And from the head, which focuses on that which is reasonable and logical and spiritual, it needs to direct the lower self, because the lower self is really poor at directing itself. And the power to pass through the various centers in the body, those universal forces and energies which are needed for world work. This involves the necessity to develop the centers and bring them to a state of potency and to harmonize them into a unified rhythm. This is what he said earlier. Each of us need to assess ourselves and kind of spiritually feel which centers are open and how open they are. And one center for all disciples to be aware of is like I say, the heart center. And if your heart center is open, you'll feel a desire to help humanity, to help others, perhaps whether you get a reward or not. And that's a real good sign. And then your throat center, do you have a feeling that you want to be creative and to be able to create things that will be of service to humanity and to others? And then the head centers, do you focus on maybe getting new ideas? Okay, if you focus on appreciating ideas and getting new ideas, then you have at least some of your head center open. And then of course, the center, the top of the head is willpower, purpose. How focused are you on higher will? Do you sometimes pick up a higher will that you're supposed to accomplish a certain thing? Now, this is difficult for many people to pick up the difference between that and impulses from your solar plexus, your desire, because a lot of people think their desire is higher will, where it's just their desire. It's not connected with spiritual will at all. It's just connected with what they want for their ego. So your ego has a will, sends out what it wants, and then your higher self sends what it wants. And the disciple needs to differentiate between the two. One is higher will, one is an unselfishness. The lower will is connected with the higher will is unselfishness. The lower will is connected with selfishness. That's the two. So the disciple needs to focus and say, am I really focused on higher will? To find the higher will, the disciple needs to have one essential quality. What essential quality is that?
Well, he's a server, service.
Right, he needs to be a server and unselfish.
Yeah.
Right,
It's called the will to good.
right. Will to good for just not self, but for all. The
Well, here's the
maximum
thing. Here's the thing.
permeation.
Once you learn to do that, the rewards comes with it. I bought a huge 100-pound bag of potatoes for cheap, like $11, and I already had plenty. And I'm just giving them away in grocery sacks. Hey, do you like potatoes? Who doesn't? And these are the best potatoes ever. They're right out of the ground. They're fresh, and people just love them. And, for basically nothing, I'm able to help a lot of people at the holiday season, and it doesn't cost me hardly anything. And it just opens up a huge door and for serving, and the feedback is what makes it worth it. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
So it's not hard to be of service. Even sometimes just your time, just spending time with people that are alone, that don't have any friends during the holidays is worth it. Ed does that. He goes down to the senior center and spreads his light around with those people that are looking for a little bit of entertainment, and he entertains them.
Yeah, I bet there's not very many people like Ed in any senior citizen center anywhere.
We went there last Wednesday, and I introduced him at the table as the guru of enlightenment, and challenged anyone there to ask him a question that he couldn't answer.
Well, that was Friday.
Friday,
Yeah.
yeah.
So did Ed get any questions?
Yeah. One guy wanted to know what was the price of eggs in China.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think he gave him what did the chicken cross the road joke?
Yeah, my son lives in China, and he says, speaking of prices, he says, what's valued over there in chickens, for instance, he says, is much different than here. He says breast meat, which is the most expensive meat here, is the cheapest meat in China, whereas chicken feet are highly prized and expensive over there. And the reason that happened was during the famines they've had in the past, they had to eat the whole chicken, including the feet, everything. And they learned to really like the feet during times of famine. And so now, where they don't have a famine, the kind of oddball parts of the chicken are some of them are highly prized. So that's an interesting little tidbit.
My grandmother always liked the part that goes over the fence last.
Oh, yeah. He says a disciple needs to develop the ability to work with any center using the third eye. He can do this when the protective webs are destroyed. Now, between each one of the centers, there's a web. And as the disciple evolves, these webs are eventually disintegrate. And then the communication between the centers is enhanced. It's kind of a symbol of the web between us and the spiritual world. It's like I say, a veil or a web between us and the spiritual world. And there's a veil between us. Is that my phone? There's a veil between us, between our centers in the same way. And as a person like develops the heart energy, for instance, the veils between the solar plexus and the heart begins to thin. And so they become eventually functioning as one unit. Even though they're still separate, they have a oneness about them that they didn't have before. And he says this, as the veils thin between the centers, there's a disciple is able to take the third eye, which is the center between the eyebrows, and focus on the third eye and then see like lines of light going from the third eye to the various centers and stimulating them. And then from the centers, they can go outward to as healing energy, or even to people in a group the person is associated with. So there's a science that he talks about that's associated with the centers and directing the powers of the centers through the third eye. And he talks about this a little bit more in the book called Esoteric Healing. And he talks about how to do healing by using the power within the centers, which is pretty interesting. Okay, he says the disciple must study the effect of his energies upon others. Their reactions will reveal the type, the quality, its strength, and speed of various energies in your centers. These 4 words warrant consideration and elucidation. Yeah, that's something most people don't think of. He uses the word, these 4 words. You have a type of energy in your centers, You have a quality of energy in your centers. There's a strength of the energy in your centers. And then he talks about the speed. Now, speed is an interesting one. I've never heard anyone talk much about speed in relation to the centers, but you have the energy in motion. As your energy pedals open, there's energy in motion there, and there's a type of energy, and then it has a certain quality, and the quality he talks about is dependent on the consciousness of the disciple. And then its strength is dependent a lot on the amount the disciple is in contact with higher will. The closer he is in contact with the soul and with his higher will, the stronger will be the vibration of the centers, and the stronger will be your influence you will be able to exert with your centers. And then this ends up increasing the speed of the flow of energy in the centers themselves. And so we'll kind of leave off here, and we'll continue talking about this next week. It's an interesting subject. Might be a good idea one of these days to maybe have some classes where we just focus on everything DK has taught about the centers. We might do that sometime in the future, make an interesting class. Okay, any comments or questions on what we covered here before we sign off?
Wonderful lessons, JJ. Thank
What's
you so
that?
much.
Oh,
Wonderful lessons, and thank you.
well, thank you, Maria.
So
It's
We're
much.
said in the
glad to have you.
Bible. It's said in the Bible that there's a time when the veils are ripped from top to bottom, the veils of the temple, and we know that our body is the temple. So we look to rip the veils of the temple from top to bottom.
Right, and when the veil was rent, then the Holy of Holies was exposed. The spiritual center of the temple was then available to be seen. And
Yeah.
this is symbolic of renting the veils between heaven and earth, between us and our souls. So when the veil is rent between us and the soul, then we can have access to the higher will, to higher vibration, higher energies. And so that rending of the veil was powerful symbolism there.
Well, another thing, Joe, when you rend the veil up to your higher head chakras and you radiate or you contemplate or you ascend your own throne, your pineal gland, you enter into a much higher dimension of peace. That's where you find the peace that passes all understanding, is when you rend the webbing that takes you up to this center up here, and you operate from your throne. And one thing I found is when you're in a practical level, if you have a hard time sleeping, if you just close your eyes and focus your attention to this place right there and hold it, the next thing you know, it's morning. Because this is your place of peace, and whatever is disturbing you or bothering you from the day is not in that place.
And esoterically, the center between the eyebrows is called the throne of God.
Right.
And the person that sits on that throne is actually you.
Yeah.
So,
In Kriya Yoga, they call it the center of the Master of Masters. This also. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, any other comments?
Thank you.
We have a good group today. Appreciate everybody being here and your comments, and hope to see you next week. Next week I don't see any reason why we shouldn't meet next Sunday about 2:00. So until then, It's great to see you, and we will look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah. And ascend your own throne.
Yeah, in the meantime, sit on your throne. Enjoy yourself.
Yeah, sit on the throne.
And have the crown on your head from the crown center.
There you go.
Yeah. A lot of symbolism. Symbolism's really interesting to contemplate.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a
Thanks,
great week,
PJ.
brothers and
Bye,
sisters.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I